Hey everyone, welcome to Sacred Laughter Podcast. I am your host, Chris Damron.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's podcast. This week, I'm going to share this podcast with my wife, Jessica.
Hey everybody.
So a few questions that we are going to discuss is mainly the adapting or overcoming challenges while we have been away for deployments or been away from family while we have served overseas in Germany. So one of the biggest concerns or questions that a lot of people have when it comes to military families is how easy and or how quickly do spouses adapt after their husband has left for overseas deployment or a very long duration of training. So here, this is where Jessica will come in, my wife, and she'll potentially answer some of these questions. So for our listeners that are military or their spouse is away for a longer period of time due to work or other events, then this will be a way that you guys can also find soothing or a way that you guys can look back to see what you guys can do together to overcome some of the challenges. So, Jessica, what are some of the challenges that you had faced, or what were things that you did to help overcome the challenge of being alone while your husband, or myself as your husband, away for deployments and or training?
Well, I think one of the most common comments I get when I would tell people that you were gone or how long you were gone or that you were doing some training or getting ready for deployment or whatever the case may be, the number one thing that people would always say is, I don't know how you do that. And there really is no kind of response to that. But I understand where they're coming from, because most people don't have a grid for that because it's just not their life. It's not their experience. They don't live that. And so the one thing for me, I think just like as humans in general, we are very adaptable as people, and you can kind of get used to anything. It's a lot of just your mindset. And so if you go into it thinking this is going to be the worst experience of my life, I can't believe this is happening, why do I have to go through this, and you're going into it with a negative thought process, your experience more than likely will probably not be super enjoyable. I remember my dad, who also served in the military. He was Air Force for, 27 some years. And when I was about to go into 7th grade, we were moving to Alabama from California. And so from one coast to the other, essentially, and you're, a tween teenager, you don't really know who you are yet, and you're making this huge change, you're leaving all your friends behind. And the one thing he said to me is basically what I just said. And he said, if your expectation is that you're going to have a terrible time, that's more than likely what your reality is going to be. He's like, but if you think on the positive and you try to, think of all the new friends you're going to make, or maybe the school is going to be interesting, or you try to think more on the positive, and you have that mindset going into it, you're more than likely going to have a more positive experience. And so I've always kind of taken that with me. Every time, you get ready to leave, I try, especially having the kids has helped as well, because it's given me something else to focus on. Like, it's not just me being at home by myself. It's, I have kids that I need to take care of, and helping them cope with and overcome and keeping them busy and emotionally healthy has kind of been a focus while you've been gone too.
Yeah, and I think when we look, we'll fast forward a little bit. So, early on in our marriage, when I deployed to my first deployment to Iraq, I think you had a very strong supportive group of girls or ladies you had from church. but you decide to go back home and live with your parents, which is fine also, because then you had a support group there as well. So when we look at those two factors of, for families or spouses that are staying local or where they're at, having a strong support group, or moving back to where your parents are or additional family is, having that support group, how could you weigh the cost of that? Like what to you would probably be more beneficial?
So I think it just depends on your individual situation and circumstance. So for me, we had gotten married, and 5 months later, you deployed for the first time, and I knew it was going to be at least a year-long deployment, and we didn't have kids, and I had been working at the same place for 2 years up until that point, and I, number one, wasn't really happy with the job that I had, and I was looking for a change. And so we had talked about me going back to school, which financially speaking it made more sense for me to go home because I moved back in with my parents. We wouldn't have rent. We would just have like our school loan payments and car payments, insurance, like just those basic bills. And then I could have more money to go to school. And so that's what I chose to do in that situation. But then I myself personally I'm more introverted. I'm a homebody. But I also need to be around people at the same time. And so if that's you, you kind of need to have at least 3 or 4 people that you can just call that are local, that can give you FaceTime, and just, even if it's, oh, I need to go school shopping, or, oh, I need, to go get groceries. Do you want to come run errands with me? Or I'm doing laundry at my house today. You want to come keep me company? Like just those type of things really do make a difference. And so if you don't have that where you are, and it makes more sense for you to go home so that you can have that familiarity and that family support system, because I've done both. But when you deployed the first time, I just felt like I had this new opportunity, and it would be an easy way for me to quit my job with a legitimate reason. Like I felt like I had to have a legitimate reason in order to be like, I'm no longer going to be working here. I just didn't want to be like, I don't like my job, I'm out. And so I felt like that for me was a clean break, and then I could go home and be able to go to school and still have, my family and support system, because I lived with them. And so I saw them every single day, and I did life with them on a regular basis. So I think that's really important, to kind of have your tribe, whether it's, blood relation or friends.
Yeah. And I think, it kind of goes both ways as well. So like for myself, when I was deployed, as Jess said, like the idea was that we were going to be gone for 1 year. And then as the 1 year started to come closer to an end, we realized that we were getting extended to 15 months. So we kind of already had it in play. Like she's going to move back up into Washington, where we're currently at now. And then she would, look for a house, get moved in, get everything settled. And then shortly, within a week or two, I'd be home. But we were notified early enough that, we got extended. So she was able to stay home a little longer, instead of taking that drive all the way back up here from California. But what I meant by is kind of on both ends, is because even for myself, recently married, as we stated, and going on our first deployment, which I was 23, I think 22, 23 years old when I deployed. So very first deployment, very new to the Army. Had the support group with all the soldiers I was currently serving with, but also like leaving my spouse home, knowing the unknown, just because we know how combat is and how the circumstances that war holds. So we kind of came up with an idea like, hey, we'll try to FaceTime, or I guess back in the day it was like Skype, or I can't remember what it was.
Like Yahoo Instant Messenger or something.
Yeah, something where we can communicate it through, and like see each other. But with the time change and then my schedule based on the operations that we were doing, it never worked out. So it was just, when you had the time to talk to him, just cherish the moment. But then also it's like, you have to be able to trust, right? So trust is the biggest thing in a marriage. You know, when we say, hey, I trust our spouses, and you just have to know. So you can have that conversation with your support life group members or your friends, and knowing like, hey, I'm doing X, Y, and Z to, you know, support my family, or for myself, I know that my wife is doing everything she needs to, and, you know, and waiting for me to come home. But there's also that negative side of the house. And for myself, deployed, you know, with other single guys and or married guys, we would hear the stories, we would have conversation. There was a lot of things that would happen. But then for me and Jess, like, we were pretty much real through the relationship, you know, our long distance relationship, where we kind of just told each other how things were going. But I looking back now, I felt like I was holding her back from her job and or her friends that we currently had here in Washington. But it's kind of a double-edged sword, where we had a lot of friends from our church that were not military, but they had military experience, but they never potentially went through the war early on during the surge in Iraq. But also we had some friends that were in the military, and they were also going on deployment. So you kind of get that struggle of like, oh, hey, did you hear about such and such? Or, hey, did you hear about that? So it's always that thought, I guess you could say, that's going to go to the back of your head. Like, oh, I haven't heard from Chris, you know, is he all right? Mm-hmm. Or in some cases, you know, when things would happen, we called it blackout. So we'd be black on comms, where we couldn't call back home. We had to give 24 hours or 36 hours. So that's what I'm saying. So there's also the struggle of potentially hearing things about combat situations from another friend that's in your group, because their spouse is also deployed. And so that thought is always going back and forth, like, hey, I haven't heard from my husband, so that means that something happened. And in many cases that wasn't true. It was just due to the fact that we had the blackout, or the operations that I was conducting were the times that we would normally call. So I wouldn't be able to call. So I'd call at late at night, hoping that she would answer the phone or answer the computer, or that she saw my message, and knowing that when she woke up that, hey, I'm okay. Everything's, you know, fine. We just, you know, something happened. Can't talk about it. We'll talk about it more in detail later. So that's what I'm saying. So looking back, I felt like I was holding her back, but at the same time, like, I knew with her being at home with her family that she was going to get the support, you know, knowing that her father was prior military as well. You know, and then now let's go, like, you talked a little bit about kids. So now let's go to the transition, like the second deployment, right? Mm-hmm. So now, you know, we're currently still in Washington. I think we were home maybe 9 months from that deployment when we officially got orders again for another deployment.
The second time you went to
Yeah,
Iraq.
so the second time I went.
Mm-hmm.
So we just had our child, Lily, our oldest daughter. I think within like 4 months, almost very similar to how we got married.
Yeah. So, yep, we were home for a little while, and then you knew you were going to be going back. And so it was 5 months after, because I remember we got married. 5 months later you left. And then once we had Lily, it was 5 months after that, that you left for the second time, for second deployment. And I just remember, because I knew I wasn't going to be working at that time, because she was just itty bitty. And I just remember, like, well, I went home once and it was okay and it worked out well. I'm just going to do it again. And so, thankfully we were just so close, being in Washington and, you know, my parents being in California, that it was just easy, and it was familiar, and it was comfortable. And so, yeah, I was like, I don't know how to be a mom and then be a mom by myself. And I also think on some level I did it because I knew then you wouldn't be worrying about me being at home, you know, by myself. And, you know, we've lived in Washington for, I don't know, how long had we lived? 5 years or something like that.
Yeah.
But we had moved apartments pretty much every year. Once our lease was up, we would move. And so we had some great places. We had some not great places. And so I knew somewhere in the back of my mind that it would be better for you, for your peace of mind, to know that we were okay, and that was just something else that you weren't going to have to stress about or worry about while you were gone. And so that was also, one of the reasons why I would go back home, because I knew, I was like, number one, we can save some money. Number two, you don't have to worry about, me and Lily. And then I would have my support system from my family being there. And
Yeah, and at the same time, we were still connected to the same church.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we just, prior, as we were dating, got married, we were involved in, I don't know what, I guess you could say like the 20-something-year-old and like early marriage.
That college age.
Yeah, college age
group,
which was awesome. And, as we kind of got a little bit older and got, married and then having the kids, and that's where we started really getting our small life groups. And like we had a phenomenal group, and like I said, most of them were military. Most of the older generation was military. So they supported us when it came to like, if, like I'm going to be gone doing training. I know that, Jess will be taken care of, because, other spouses or other wives are going to, look after her. But it did make sense. Like Jess was just saying that, going home, because there's also the thing like, okay, I have a newborn. Right. If something happens, what's going to happen? Right. If someone breaks in the house, or if there's a emergency somewhere and I need to go somewhere and I need someone to watch the kid, or at least not kids, not yet, but just Lily, then that just, like you said, that just lifted a lot of the worry off of me.
Yeah. And I think too, for me, it was on some level, I always felt like, and I don't know, maybe more people feel this way, but like when you ask your friends for favors, it's more of like, oh gosh, I have to ask my friends for favors again. Whereas if it's your family, it's almost just like this built-in understanding that, whatever you need, I'm here for you. At least like in my family. I know not everybody's family's that way, but I knew that with my family, it didn't matter, and I didn't ever even really have to ask. I was just like, hey, would it be okay? And they were always, my parents were like, absolutely, we have space for you. We'd love for you to stay with us. And so that was never a question. So I just felt like it was just easier for me and my mentality, because I would be one to, okay, it's fine. I'm going to suck it up. I'm going to be here. I have, this kid. I have no idea how to be a parent. And I'm just going to do it. And I would have figured it out, but I don't think I would have enjoyed the process nearly as much and cherished like all of her like firsts, like I was able to do being at home with my family. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. And I think also to know is like my parents were just as open.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For you to move in with them if needed to. I think it was just, geographically where we were located, like it's kind of like a triangle, from California, Northern Utah, into Washington. But
yeah. And I remember your mom specifically saying that. She's like, you're more than welcome to come here anytime. And I do remember the first time you deployed, and we were just newly married, had no kids yet, and I remember being like, well, I'm just going to go visit your parents. And I remember your mom picked me up from the airport, and she said that she was like, well, I'm really glad you came. She was like, but I was kind of surprised you wanted to visit us by yourself. And so I just remember that, and I just love that comment. And I just was like, well, you're family now. Of course I'm going to come see you. And so, they've always just been very open and willing to take us in and do whatever they need, and always be a place that we can go. And so I did that with Lily too. When you deployed the second time, I went and visited them with her, and spent some time with them, and that was fun. That was a good time. So
yeah, so there's like a small little snippet of like early on marriage, having kids, then I got back from my second deployment, had our youngest daughter, Ileana, and then, as the Army does in good fashion, they just tell you, hey, it's time to move. Right. And they kind of gave us a few options. And this was our option that we felt like we wanted the most, was to go to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And so now here we are as a family together, still knowing the unknowns of what's going to happen when we get to Germany. But, so now we're moving as a family away from our families to, overseas, to a new location we've never been before. We don't know the language. We don't know anybody that's over there. To an organization that we didn't have anything to know about it, when I worked for DITRA.
Yeah, because it was completely different from your standard, infantry MOS. You were just like, okay, well, I'm going to be doing something brand new.
Yeah, so we got to Ramstein Air Force Base, a gentleman in a suit and tie, Jason Hampton, was there to kind of pick us up, and we're just like, oh, okay, what's happening? And then
yeah, that was so disorienting, because I remember just the logistics of 2 kids and all your suitcases and strollers and car seats and gear and the whole thing was just, and was that the flight that we had to stay in the hotel overnight?
Well,
because
the flight in Baltimore was, it wasn't.
They had a mechanical issue or something, and so they grounded us. And it was supposed to be an overnight flight. It was a late night flight, and we were supposed to arrive in Germany early morning. So it was a red eye. And I just remember we had to all take taxis to the hotel, and the airline covered the hotel. It was fine, but it was just I don't have diapers. All my stuff, all the kids' stuff was on the airplane. And so that was just, I don't know. Those are just one of those things where you just, okay, well, again, I don't know what's going to happen. And I could have a positive attitude or a negative attitude about it, but you're just, looking back now, it's just you just kind of have to laugh at the circumstance and the situation. And it was a little bit wild, because I remember you running to Walgreens or something like that.
Yeah, to get stuff for
in
the
the
kids.
middle of the night, because we got to the hotel at 2 a.m. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to put these kids to bed, and they need a change of diaper, and they need something to eat. And I was like, I don't even have any baby food. I don't know what we're doing. And you ran to the store and got diapers and just some super basic supplies to get us through to the morning. And then, yeah, that was a crazy flight. But he picked us up that morning, and it was raining when we got there. But it was just, I just remember it being so disorienting, because we had such a late night and the night prior, and then the whole long flight was I don't know, 16 hours. Was it even that long?
And very minimal interaction with anybody.
Yeah.
Even when we got to Ramstein, it was, hey, drop your bags off here. If you're going to be taking the bus, we're going to call you by name. And we're just sitting in this room with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, it was holding area.
Yeah, and I just remember at the time I was a staff sergeant, so I remember a gentleman saying, Staff Sergeant Damron, come with me. And I kind of just got up, left you and the girls sitting there, went outside the room into another room, and that's where I remember meeting Jason Hampton. And he's like, oh, does a quick introduction, and he's like, all right, let's go. And I was like, well, I need to go back in and grab my wife and kids. And he's like, oh yeah, I didn't know you were married. So there was that dialogue, I guess, when through, we call Human Resources Center out of HRC, my orders stated, I'm PCSing to a new location. Here's my name. Here's my wife and kids' names. But I guess nothing was ever passed off correctly, right? Mm. And then we get in the vehicle. We meet Christopher Gray, and he takes us to the hotel, checks us in, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Right. So now we're in Germany. No clue where we're at in Germany, other than I just remember getting in a vehicle. I think it was a gray van, because that's kind of what we had in the organization. Mm-hmm. Takes us to the Barbarossa Hof, which is a phenomenal hotel. We looking back now.
Oh yeah, that was a great spot. I love that spot. And I thought, oh, we landed on Ramstein Air Force Base. That's where we're going to be staying. No, because that's not where you worked. You worked 20 minutes in K-Town, Kaiserslautern. And so that's where they took us, was a hotel that was close to where his office was going to be.
It was a mile, maybe.
And that place was really fun, though. It was a good spot for us. And I just remember we were there for 2 weeks. So he dropped us off. We have no car. We have no vehicles. So they were picking you up every day and taking you into work.
Yep.
And I was just there at the hotel until someone could come take us and we can start looking for a house. And that was interesting with 2 kids. So we moved there. Ileana was 1 and Lily was 3. And I mean, I was so used to just being at home with the kids anyway, but the time change, I think, was like the biggest struggle for myself. But then when you're having to like regulate and adjust kids' schedule at the same time, it was a challenge. But they had this really pretty, this is the one thing I remember loving about Germany so much, is they had so many like trails and walking paths, and it was just like so much nature everywhere, even in between like big cities. Every small town and village, there would be like just nature. And so there was this really pretty like brick path that walked right by this river, and it fed into this lake. And so me and the kids would just walk that every day, and that was our routine for 2 weeks until we found a house. So that I loved that spot.
So we were able to find a house which was all the way back by Ramstein, but we kind of did that on purpose because it was close to the air base. It was close to things that we knew we needed, but that didn't stop us from exploring Germany to the fullest, you know. And I know we went out whenever we could, but then my schedule kind of got a little wonky as well, you know, going on missions, but our missions were only a week at a time, but it turned into a portion where I did very well in my job, and I kind of went out a lot.
Yeah, you went like once a month for
a
week.
At least once or twice a month, depending.
Quite some time. But, I mean, you're in Europe, and that's the other cool thing is living in the States, it's, you know, when you travel to another state, it's like, okay, it's this whole ordeal, and you got to drive for however long, and the flights and this and that, whatever. Europe, everything's just so close together, and so you would go, and it'd just be a few hours, and you'd be there, and you'd be like, oh yeah, we're taking the train to here, and like everything was just so close, but then you're just in a different country. And so that part I think was really cool, and I loved living near Ramstein, but being in like a German village, because number one, like the post that you were on was a lot smaller, and it was majority of it was just like military facility, like military offices and those types of things. Where Ramstein, they had the huge mall, they had
schools.
They had the schools were on Ramstein. I mean, there was one on Kaiserslautern. There was like Kaiserslautern High School.
Yeah.
But they had, all the like child and youth services were over there, and I mean, there was just a lot more for the like families to do and be a part of, like on Ramstein, and so that's I think why we chose to be over on that side. But I mean, I loved it. I would go back in a heartbeat. I love Germany.
But like I said, that didn't stop us from going out and exploring, or even if I was out on mission and you were with your friends who also had kids age, right? And then you guys went out and explored some of the castles nearby. Yeah. But even when Uncle Mike came out, you met him in Mainz, did all that stuff up there. And then when your parents came out, we drove around. We went to Luxembourg, went to Paris.
We did Normandy.
Normandy, showed him a bunch of places. We went to Waterloo a couple of times, which was awesome.
And what was that place on the chateau? What was that big? It was up on the mountain. What was that place? It was like an island. I want to say Chateau Saint Michel, but that's
it. Well,
I thought that was a wine.
It might be the wine. I think it's the same thing. Saint Michel. Yeah, the one out by south of Normandy.
Yeah.
In
that place
France.
was so cool, and it downpoured while we were there. But that place was so cool. I love that spot.
Yeah, and I think the biggest things I remember is like we weren't afraid just to try something. So we would see a restaurant, or we would see a beer garden, or something that we're like, oh, hey, let's go in and try this. And we would experience, new foods, new...
Schweinhaxen.
Yeah, Schweinhaxen. But it also allowed us to learn the language where we were becoming more adaptive, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things is that we as humans, like we try to stay in our comfort zone as much as possible.
Yeah, I think it's human nature to kind of stay in familiar territory or where you're comfortable. I know for me personally, like my personality, my temperament, I'm introverted, I'm a homebody. I like to just go with the status quo. And so whatever I was doing yesterday is pretty much what I'm going to do the next day. And so I don't like a lot of, I'm a planner. I don't like a lot of spontaneity. It doesn't mean I can't be spontaneous and I can't like go with that. But my tendency is just to do the same thing I did the day before. And so I think for me, it just is, it was a little bit of a challenge for me when we moved to Germany because that was a huge jump outside of my comfort zone, especially with the language barrier, because even just driving around, I'm like, I don't even know, like, is this a grocery store? Is this like a restaurant? Like, what kind of clothing store is this? Like, you just don't know. Everything is just this extra level of, trying to work to figure out, where am I going today? What am I doing today? Does this place have what I'm looking for? And then also having kids in tow. And so, yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
And I know there's a lot of people that stay within their comfort zone, and I'm not saying it's bad or anything. I don't think there's a need to stay in your comfort zone too long, because then you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities. Mm-hmm. And it kind of takes me back to like people I know in my family who in many cases won't try something new, won't want to go somewhere because they've never been there before, or they're not experienced in something like that. Because for us, or I should say for me, I've been able to travel pretty much all over the world, been almost every country in Europe. But I've been to Korea, I've been to Taiwan, I've been to almost every country in Europe where I've been able to see what the world has to offer. And I know that we have plans that we would love to go other places as well. And that's kind of opened up our broad spectrum of the idea that we want to travel, right? So, looking at Germany, that kind of opened our door, for ourselves as a family to go experience new things. So, we can go a lot more in depth in a lot of things that we did in Germany, but then, we're also like, hey, what's the next step or the next phase that we wanted to try? Knowing that our girls are now a little bit older because we did 4 years in Europe. But now we decided that we want to go to Alaska. So we spent some time in Alaska. Like I said, we're not going to go into full detail of that, but we experienced cold weathers. We experienced, the nice summers they had. We went fishing, went hunting, a little bit of camping. We kind of made some of our own camping experiences.
Where we took a little bit of camping. We did like
an enclosed trailer.
I don't know, redneck camping. I don't know what you would call it, but it was very rustic. Let's just say that.
Yeah, we bought a enclosed trailer. Or actually,
it was like a cargo trailer with nothing on the inside.
But that was after we went to North Carolina.
No, right.
So yeah, we spent some time in North Carolina. So as you kind of look at that, well, then we went back to Alaska. So yeah, that's kind of was our stint away from our family. So Germany opened the door for us to go further away from our family, and that's where we realized that we're kind of on our own. Like our family is us.
Yeah.
Me, you, and the girls. And then family came and visit us in Germany, and then we got to Alaska, and then, your parents, my brother and his family came up to visit. But what I'm trying to like circulate this too is like the hardship of not just internally to us as a family, that with me deploying, because when we were in North Carolina, I deployed again for 9 months. And you stayed there in North Carolina, and you had like a somewhat of a life group, not. Yeah, I guess you could say we had a life group, and then also you were working as well.
Yeah,
watching.
But that was the thing that I knew, like I had mentioned before, for myself, I knew, okay, I'm 100% staying here this time, and this is my first deployment where I'm staying, and because the kids were older, they were established, they were in school, like all of that, and I was like, I know myself, I know that I'm going to need people that, number one, will just let me be me, and number two, not force me to do stuff I didn't want to do. Like, you know, sometimes
Yeah.
you're like, you get into like, you know, an SFRG or, you know, which is like a family readiness group, which is just basically a group of like soldiers, service members, and then their families. And it's, on some level, if you don't really know people, it's like forced family fun, and it's super awkward for me because I am introverted, and so it's hard for me. I don't like small talk. Like, I like talking to people, but I don't do well with just surface level, like chitty chatty small talk. Like, it doesn't do well for me. So I totally just forgot what I was going to say because I looked right at your face.
Yeah. Well, but
Don't make eye contact.
yeah. But I think what you're trying to say is like, because you knew that it was going to be your first deployment
Yeah.
away from your internal family, like you had built an external family.
Yeah, exactly.
With the friends, you know, and again, it was, I think one of them was someone like I worked with. And then a couple of the other ladies were part of the life groups that we attended, or life group that we attended. But
Well, and they were all kind of like military connected.
Yeah, all of them were,
So that also was another layer just of like understanding, which was so nice because you don't have to do all this extra explaining. It's just this general level of like understanding and knowledge on a different level. And so it helps you just to relate, where, you know, you don't have to explain every acronym. You don't have to go into, which is, it's totally fine. I don't mind doing that, but it's just different when like when your spouse is deployed. It's just this level of like, okay,
continuity.
we don't need to go there. Like,
Well,
I don't
yeah.
need all the extra details. I don't need to know, like, let's just chat, you know, or, you know.
But yeah, but you know, if we look back to what I said earlier in the podcast, where I kind of made a negative statement of, you know, having friends that when their husbands were deployed, also, there's nothing wrong with having friends that are also in the military, as long as their husband's not in the same unit. That is, so that comes where that negativity is, where they're hearing one thing from their spouse, you're hearing something else from your spouse, because they're concurrently doing the exact same thing. With that group, we had, I think it was one person was medically retired, so he spent some time in the Marine Corps, then spent some time in the Army. One of the other gentlemen, he was National Guard, and then the third gentleman was Special Forces National Guard, and then
Army medic.
Army medic, Special Forces, then went active duty as they got ready to move to Colorado. So that's where I would say the continuity came, where they all understood like what I was doing and how to please you in a comfort zone, knowing
There was
that,
like just
that I
level
was
of
away.
support and friendship that just, it's on a different level because there is that kind of knowledge base and understanding of like what you're going through, because on some level they've all experienced it as well. So that was nice. But it was the first time that I was sans my family. Like, they weren't there. And I knew that I needed that. I knew that I needed that support system. And so, or someone to just be like, hey, what are you doing for Halloween? Or what's your Thanksgiving plans? I don't want to eat by myself. You know, those types of things that you can just do life and just be with other people, because we aren't meant to do life alone. We're relational beings, and we're meant to be in families. And so knowing that that's the case, and purposely and intentionally seeking out people that you want to do life with and connect with, I think is really, really important. And making sure that you have the right kind of people around you, because there definitely were people that I could have chosen to spend time with and hang out with, but I specifically chose not to, just because I didn't want to just have to deal with, there's just like some immaturity and like pettiness, and people just want to gossip and those types of things, and that's just not, I don't care to spend my time doing that. So
Yeah, and then then we started talking about. Then we went back to Alaska.
Yeah.
Did our camping thing. Spent some time again up there where we absolutely loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I think our two favorite, I would say three, but our two favorite locations we have been, is Alaska and Germany,
Mm-hmm.
Outside of here in Washington. But it was kind of a blessing in disguise for us to come back here to Washington
Mm-hmm.
because of an opportunity that arose. And we kind of knew that we wanted to retire here. And that's something that we discussed, not in full detail, but like, hey, if the opportunity came, would it be cool, if we went back to Washington, and then if it worked out, then I would retire. And that's kind of where we're at now. So, we've been here since 2022, as the transition's going on here this next spring of 25, I'm going to retire. But there is that thing where like, we kind of knew that I would be leaving again for something. And then I ended up leaving for 6 months for an advisory role, in the Pacific. But, during that time, it was probably, in my opinion, I think it was probably the hardest time because like the girls are older, they're teenagers now.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at the duration of the time, yeah, it's only 6 months, but like, what do we miss? Like I miss Thanksgiving. I miss, what else? I miss Christmas, New Year's. I was able to be home for birthdays. I missed our anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things too, where we take for granted because we all know during the holiday season is the hardest time for families and also for individuals because they want to be close to home. They want to cherish some moments, but having that or having the support group that we currently have now
Mm-hmm.
has been phenomenal for us, and then
Yeah.
for you, especially with me when I was gone, and we're still in that group now, like we do life together and everything. And that's really important when we look at the big picture of how can you overcome adversities as well as overcome individual challenges that you may face. Because a lot of things we do is individually brought on among ourselves because negative thinking, negative thought, same thing. But
Surrounding yourself with negative people.
yeah, surrounding yourself with negative
Yeah.
people, potentially doing things that you wouldn't do if you weren't around those people.
Mhm.
And again, that's just choices we make in life.
Mm-hmm. That's why I think it's, for me at least, I've learning as I have gotten older. With age comes wisdom. That your intention, you have to be intentional about the relationships you have, the things that you do. Like I can look back or, in my early 20s, even into my mid-20s, late 20s, and just in hindsight being like, oh yeah, I could see because of, the people I was surrounding myself with or the friends that I had, or I see why I thought that way or why I would make those types of choices in like high school and things like that. But as you get older, I think it just becomes more important, and you start to realize that the people that you choose to spend your time with do really have an impact on you.
Yeah, and it can change you for the good or the bad.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think where we're at, socially wise, I think we have come a long ways from where we where we started
Yeah.
when we first got married. But it goes back to like everything we've done together, right? It was together. It wasn't me doing one thing, you potentially back home with your parents. If we didn't support one of each other, support one another. Yeah, support one another. But if we also felt that maybe it wasn't the right decision, we also had the communication.
Yeah.
Right. We were able to talk about it and discuss about it. And that's been, crucial in overcoming, because like through my time in the military, like I've had to overcome a lot of adversity and challenges, but in the same notion, I would have never thought that you would have had to overcome a lot of adversities either. But because I was suffering from potential things that happen on deployment, you were also suffering from, being away from me, or, raising, a child alone with your parents, and then, go like, as we stated, like going to a whole another country where we didn't know anything was going on.
Mm-hmm.
But we ended up loving it and falling in love with it. And that opened our horizon to go do other things, which we're constantly doing now. And and sharing our knowledge with other people, as well as seeing our kids grow through the transitions that we have made in life. And as we continue to transition, like our biggest transition is going to be here this next spring. You know, as we close one chapter,
Yeah, man.
right, we're opening another chapter. We're stepping out of the norm where, you know, like we say military life is a lifestyle. It is. It's something that we have looked at for the last 18 years of marriage, 20 years of my career plus, you know, and even with our girls. But now we're able to literally settle down and start, you know, our own journey where we're not waiting for someone to say, hey, there's going to be some orders that's going to send you here or there,
Yeah.
you know, potentially with family or without family. But that's also, you know, with the job perspective too, when we look at that.
I know. That's the crazy thing. I just thought, like, I have never known you not being in the military.
Yeah.
I met you right after basic training, and
Yeah.
this was your first duty station. And yeah, that's wild. I didn't even think about that.
So I'm not going to say they're going to see me as a different person, but it's definitely going to be a different notion where, you know, waking up on a weekday, kind of what I've been doing now since I'm not really going to work anyway. But like, instead of putting a uniform on, just putting the clothes on, you know, and just really having the opportunity to like really settle down as a family and just continue to live life like how we want to, instead of, like I said, just waiting for something to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, in closing with this, a lot of things we discussed today, which, you know, is going to be very, very helpful to, you know, anyone that listens to this, or a married couple that's struggling through adapting with challenges. You know, you're not alone. Like we have gone through our own adversities. We have faced things where we thought we were alone, and we safeguarded our conversation, or we safeguarded our heart, knowing that our spouse may be supportive or not supportive. But in the long run, you know, everything we have done together has been together as a family, and we have made executive decisions that we knew that would benefit all of us, not just for one person. Right. And it has brought up multiple conversations. It has brought up different paths that we looked back and said, hey, we could have done this differently. We could have done that differently. But we continue to put each other's needs first in some fashion, but also we understand like each other's hearts. We understand the desires that we all have. And I think as we continue, you know, to grow as a family, as well as the two of us, right? Because our kids will eventually move out.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. But we know how to overcome our notion of, I want to talk to my spouse about this. Is it okay? We may, like I said, we may not want to bring it up, but we need to bring it up because we need to have the conversation. Right. So like I was saying, if there's any family or married couple that's, you know, having, you know, struggling, you're not alone. Like we've all been through it. Don't ever look at a married couple and think that they're living the best life they've ever lived, because the best life that they're living is probably the now. Right. And a lot of families and a lot of people just don't discuss the ups and downs of relationship, marriage. And when I mean relationship, it's just not about each other. It's about their friends they've had that has influenced them to do the things for the right or the wrong. You know, and as we continue to, you know, deep dive further into a lot of the discussions that we'll have on this podcast, like you're going to hear some things that, you know, we've been through, you know, a lot of the challenges, but the challenges were brought to point because we needed to overcome them. We needed to face them head on and not just put them in our closet. And hopefully we could just continue to keep them in dark places and no one will know what's going on. And that's really that's the reason we are who we are now, is because we've been able to spread light on our challenges and our differences. But also we have always taken the focus point or the center of our relationship, you know, to the gospel, right? To the word. And, you know, how can we overcome this, you know, walking in faith and putting our faith in Christ Jesus, as well as supporting one another as we continue to walk this path that we're on.
Yeah. I mean, I think just as I've been hearing you talking, like summarizing and picking up a few of the things that we've already mentioned before, is that we were not meant to be alone. As people, we're meant to be in community, and you have to talk to each other in order to be in community. Like, we can't just be like a silent partner. You have to be willing to be open and to be vulnerable. And I think that was, this will be for another podcast, cliffhanger. But that's one thing, that you have to be willing to share the things that you don't want to share. And I think that, having a level of trust and that level of intimacy with, your spouse is really important, because it builds trust, but it also lets the other person know that, like, you're not perfect. Because I think sometimes people look at even especially from the outside, you had mentioned, like, people look at your relationship or our relationship or, whatever, and think, oh, they have it all together. They have this perfect marriage. They have this, perfect family. And especially with, the height of social media and all of that, like, everyone puts their best foot forward, their best face forward, and you only see what people want you to see and what they show you. And so if you don't dig beyond that and scratch below the surface and see the deeper layers, you only have a surface relationship. And so I think that we, or at least myself, like, went into our marriage thinking and having these certain expectations. And I very quickly learned that, life is not happily ever after, like all the Disney movies that I grew up watching, and that it's real life, and it gets real messy real quick, and you have to be intentional, but you also have to be vulnerable, and you have to be honest, and you have to share who you are without fear. And until you get to that place, at least for me, it's a really lonely road.
Yeah, and I would add too that a marriage is not a check the block thing either.
Right.
When you're married, the check the block is, do I have everything in line to marry this woman? Does she meet my characteristics? And like what Jess was saying earlier, or what you were saying earlier, like cliffhanger, like we met on a blind date, right? And that kind of started our relationship, and we had our ups and downs. And like I said, we'll continue to share stuff like this in the future.
Don't give away too much too soon.
Yeah, too much too soon.
Stay tuned.
But it's also, marriage is not something that you live through other people. Mm-hmm. You use other people to build your marriage and to help with the connective tissues that may have been torn.
Ooh, connective tissues that have been torn. I like that analogy or metaphor, whatever that is. But yeah, I think it's important that you are not just adapting to your spouse, but that you're really connecting, because when you're vulnerable and open, and you reach out to your spouse with intention to get to know them and for them to get to know you better, you start to mend those connective tissues that have been torn. So I just want to say thanks for having me on the podcast today. This was fun. I was a little bit apprehensive because I'm not a sharer, but I think this was a good time. So we'll have to do it again.
Awesome. And just thank you for being real and blunt and able to share, our journey that we have done together. Because even though we were apart for a majority of it, we still did everything together through our spirit.
Yeah.
And our love for one another. So please stay tuned for our next episode, and just appreciate the time that we had together with Fellowship.